First, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up. That's great. And of course, I'd also like to thank Carlin and Dana and Trevor and everybody else at Oeno Gallery for putting this together. By way of introducing my work today and giving you an idea of what a starting point, an idea of what I'm talking about, I'm going to show a short video, a 5-minute video, and we'll watch it. And I promise to be here when we get back. Okay.
My work over the years has taken many forms, but it's really only been about one thing, and that thing is what I call the mythic potential of science. And that's based on two sort of truisms, I believe. And the first is that myth is neither lies, fairy tales, or superstitions, nor is it history, truth, and fact. Myth is art. It's the picture of the world, the poem of the world, that the movie of the world that we all hold in our minds, and gives us sort of a sense of place and belonging, and allows us to understand the world. And that understanding is not, as many people believe, myth is not based on our ignorance of the world and how it works, but actually on our understanding of the world and how it works. And today, that understanding is scientific. And we are presently in the midst of a huge scientific and technological revolution. And it's going to demand a revolution in our mythic ideas of the world. And science will not replace religion, which is simply a model of mythology, but will inform a new mythology. And I'm not even suggesting that we should do this, or we shouldn't do this. What I'm saying is that we will do this. To ask humans not to mythologize their world, not to have a mythic picture of the world in their minds, is like asking them not to dream in their sleep. It just simply will happen. So what I'm doing in my work is oftentimes taking symbols and objects that we understand intuitively and building pieces that deal with that new scientific understanding of the planet. Conceptually, they're all based on the same idea. And some of them are sort of abstract representations of galaxies. And the stomach still believes that the world is flat and we're standing still, but science tells us that, we're living in this expanding universe and we're flying at thousands of kilometers per second. And not only are we flying at thousands of kilometers per second, but everything around us is on fire as we're doing it. It's like this huge circus act, right? Trapeze act. And intuitively, we don't really understand that. So my galaxies aren't made of stars, they're made out of feathers. Because intuitively we understand what a feather is. A feather is for flying. It's beautiful, but the purpose of a feather is not to be beautiful. The purpose of a feather is to fly. And so by taking that image or iconic image of a feather and relating that to flight and using that to build a galaxy is a visual way to represent that scientific discovery, that scientific understanding of our place in the universe. The language, scientific language, is mathematics. And many physicists argue that the mathematics can't be literally translated into a picture of the real world. And that may be true, but it will be translated. And that translation will be through art and myth. We live in a world that's dominated by science and technology. And the only way forward is for humans to have some kind of connection, to have some kind of understanding of how this works. And that explanation will be art.
I guess I have some explaining to do. I have to clarify some terms I'm using here. And given the loaded nature of words like mythology and religion, I've found that you can get into a lot of trouble when you touch that rail. So I was thinking last night, how am I going to deal with this up front? What would be a quick way of doing that? And I decided that I was going to write a disclaimer. So I'm going to read a disclaimer for you right now. And so to start, to be clear, I have not received any revelations from angels, aliens, or any delegation representing the great people of Atlantis. It follows then that what follows here has not been dictated, sanctioned, or approved by any mind other than the one in my own head. I have not been chosen or charged by any transcendent power or presence to pass any important message on to the rest of humanity. I have not uncovered by chance or discerned through manipulation of numbers or geometry an ancient wisdom concerning the meaning of life or the nature of reality. Nor have I seen the future, so there will be no grand visions of our destiny, utopian, dystopian, or otherwise. And as for an afterlife, whether it be oblivion or bliss, I have no idea. I cannot describe for you what it is like, or who you need to talk to about reservations. In short, I am not trying to start my own religion or recruit followers. In the video, I talked about the mythic potential of science. And so I don't have to explain the word science, but I have to talk a little bit about what I mean by mythic and mythology. Most people think mythology is religion. You know, obsolete religions are the ones we have now, and but they fail to recognize that that although all religion is mythology, not all mythology is religion, and we have a huge industry right now who are working very hard to hack your mythic idea of the world. And that idea, that mythic idea in your mind encompasses what you think the world is and how you think the world works and what your place in the world is. And we all have our own abstract idea in our minds about that. As far as the mythic potential of science, I'd like to start with a real world example and watch the process as it happened. Now, we all know this image, Earthrise. It was taken by astronaut William Amber, I think it was, in Apollo 8 mission to the moon. And you know, this image changed a lot of people's mythic idea of, you know, their place in the universe. And watching that blue dot float in that black space. What's interesting about this image, and what I didn't find out till many years later, is that NASA fiddled with it before they released it to the public. this is the original image. Now, this makes sense technically because Apollo 8 didn't land on the moon. They orbited the moon. So this is the image as they came around from the backside of the moon and were able to see Earth floating off in the distance. So this big thing on the right-hand side here, this is the surface of the moon. Now, the people at NASA recognized the impact this image could have immediately. They also recognized that in order to take advantage of that, they were going to have to rotate it right, one stop. And it worked. This image immediately put us all on the surface of the moon in lawn chairs with our drinks in our hand as we watched the Earth rise above the horizon. And in this image took all the technical and scientific know-how of NASA at the time to produce, but some artistic sensibility at NASA also realized it needed to be abstracted in some way. And so this is a scientific idea that through art, the photograph, the image, changed our mythic ideas of the world. I'm going to show a bunch of pictures of older work and work my way up into the future. These were one of the first pieces. I think this is 2001, 2002. I made these pieces. These are some of the first pieces that I made talking about our place in the universe and our flight. The top element, of course, is represents the sun, and the feather is used as an image to imply flight or orbit or movement. The bottom element is the moon, and in between is a circular abacus that keeps track of events. And for generations, farmers watched the sun and the moon and determined when to plant and when to harvest. And this piece is called Harvest. It's also, there's a point in the lunar month, the lunar calendar, where the sun is setting in the west and the full moon is rising in the east. And there's mythically, that's always been considered a kind of balance, a balance point in the month. Blood tides. The moon doesn't just pull on the ocean, it pulls on every cell of your body. I worked for a couple of years for St. Mike's Hospital on the streets of Toronto with alcoholics and addicts and people with trauma and mental illness. And trust me, we knew when the full moon was out. Gravity. I don't know why that Robinson 12 is down there, but gravity, the force that drives all this movement and all this movement that creates time, because there is no time without movement. The force that does that, of course, is gravity. And a detail shot with my. This was a piece that took that idea of flight and referenced it to the idea of dreaming. The dreamer flies. And this piece is called Veil, and the dreamer is able to fly through the veil that separates the conscious and the unconscious world. And so again, I use like I said in the video, I use the image of the feather to imply flight, and that's what these pieces were all about. These are all handmade solid glass feathers. In the lunar calendar, which we don't generally use anymore except for religious holidays, the start of the month is always the first moon, which is the crescent moon that appears in the sky after 3 days dark. And mythically, it's about resurrection and rebirth. And well, that's the image. There's the crescent. Balance. This was a piece I created with architect's third uncle designer's third uncle design, John Tong and Risa Zam, and it was about balance in the sense that these boats actually floated in these aquariums, were driven by fans, but also balance in that there's solid, liquid, and gas, excuse me, involved. And that the idea that there's always a balance, that the materials and the energy might change states, but the total remains the same. Pond. This years ago, when I was a Cub Scout, my first canoe trip was down a river called Burnt River, and the river wasn't on fire while we were canoeing down it, but my imagination kind of ran away with me, and years later, I saw it as symmetry. Again, that kind of balance, that there's always that opposing force, or everything is in balance. And symmetry is an important scientific idea. The world, the whole universe, when you add up everything, becomes zero. You end up at zero. That's the idea. And so again, whether materials or energy change states, the equation always adds up to zero. These pieces, this is aspen, again with that balance idea, solid glass elements, with a centerpiece made out of electroformed copper. And again, that idea of the reflection in the water, and the idea of balance and symmetry. Fire under embers. A detail shot. Fire and water.
John, while you're on that detail shot,
Right.
Can you just talk to us about how you did that? Just the electroforming?
Yeah, let's go back to this. No, that's not it. Sorry. So the way I constructed these pieces is I pulled these solid glass elements. There's two elements in each piece, and they're held together by a copper element that's produced by electroforming. I have a large electroformer, so And that element in the center represents the bank of the river. And of course, the what's above is the fire, the forest on fire, and what's below is its reflection in the water. So it's a long kind of process, but it's like one of those processes that you just leave and it runs on its own. Is that what you wanted, Carlin?
Well, I just didn't know if maybe everybody else knows what electroforming is. It was a mystery to me what it was when you first introduced me to the idea.
Yeah, well, you have a solution of copper and you charge the piece negatively. The copper comes out of the solution and adheres to the piece. And it's been used to make sculpture. Of course, everybody understands it as silver plating or copper plating, but this is like copper plating on steroids. It actually builds the copper element. This is spring and water, and this is the start of my wave work. So because most of my pieces are glass, they usually start in the glass studio where I make the elements, and blowing glass is an enjoyable pastime. I think mainly because most of my practice is singular. You know, me, myself, and I in the studio, working in the hot shop with a team of people. And I'm lucky to be able to work with some very good glass blowers. Is just fun. And it takes a great deal of energy and effort and practice to get to the point where you can make the kind of elements you want. And these pieces were I taught a bit at Espace Fair in Montreal for years, and these pieces were made at the Glass Studio of Espace Fair. As you can see, it's a pretty kind of dynamic and very hot process. But I think I'll just let you watch the end. So wave pieces. There's a iconic experiment was done in the late 1920s, and they were looking into the particle wave duality of light, and so I encourage you all to Google Double-Slit Experiment, because if you want to tie your brain into a pretzel, that will do it. Basically, the experimental results showed that whether light is a particle or a wave depends on whether somebody's looking at it or not, and that even pretending to look at it changes light from a wave of probability into an actual particle. And the consequence of that, although it took them 80 years to get around to it, the consequence of that is that physicists have started to examine the role of consciousness in the construction of the universe in terms of particles. That particles are actually waves of probability until they react or until some conscious agent examines them. They put a camera against the double-slit experiment and pretended to take a picture, but never turned the camera on. And the probability wave collapsed anyway, and light became a particle. Anyway, no time to get into the craziness of it now, but like I say, I encourage you all to Google double-slit experiment. Bang bang. This is a piece that references the Big Bang, and we all know what the Big Bang is. We all understand the theory and the idea of the multiverse, and that there was a point that contained all the potential of the multiverse, and it exploded into and expanded into these bubbles that contained that brought into existence space and time. That space and time did not exist before the Big Bang, and the idea of the Big Bang was our Big Bang was only one of many Big Bangs, and that event is what created the universe. And in terms of the mythic potential of science, the idea of the Big Bang is as good a creation story as that of the garden. You know, if I want to get a fire and brimstone voice and start talking about how in the void there was nothing, and then appeared a point that held all the potential of the universe, you can see how that can become a creation story that has also the added advantage of being, as far as we can know, true. And a creation story of that ilk, of that kind, changes your mythic ideas of the world. And whether you see them as mythic or mythology or not, the mythic contains that mythic idea in the world that you hold in your mind references ideas like belonging, destiny, meaning, and you know, whether you believe in the Big Bang or whether you believe in some of our traditional mythic ideas about the creation of the world will change the way you see the world and will change the way you see your place in the world. Detail. How am I doing for time, Carlin?
You're doing fine, John. It's at 12:35 at the moment.
Okay, so another 5-6 minutes?
Oh, another 10 if you want, 10 or 15.
Okay. Movements. Again, the idea of the multiverse, and again, the idea of time and space. These are blown glass spheres. I think the biggest one may be 6 or 7 inches across. And I searched through junk stores for a year to find all the old clock parts. And it's sort of like building a ship in the bottle kind of thing, you know. Interesting pieces to create. But anyway, I think there's an obvious allusion to clocks and time here. And again, the bubble being the space. detail. While blowing the bubbles, I quickly quench them in water, and that gives them that shattered appearance. Departure. Okay. Most of the time, I deal with these ideas in terms of their universal aspect, but you know, a mythic idea operates on two levels. There's the universal, and then there's the local. And I grew up in the forest. I spent a great deal of my early life, my summers camping in the woods, and we lived in the woods. And the way there's a universal idea, but then there's a local inflection of that idea. So in the woods, the world is a secret. It's quiet. You can't see, you know, more than 20 feet. So things are appearing in your vision all the time, and there's an attitude there. People who live in the prairies, they have a very different idea of the world. And instead of trees and forests and secrets, it's wide open spaces. You can see something coming from, you know, kilometers away. And so, you know, a desert people, they don't dress their deity up or their divine idea up in jungle plumage. And although these ideas are universally human, meaning creation, destiny, there's always a local inflection on.
John, how did you make these?
You have to go out. You have to go out in the woods in the spring. There's a industrial park being constructed near my house, and they're bulldozing all the cedar trees. So I go in the spring, and when you get the tree at the right point in the spring, you can just peel the bark off. The bark just comes off like cellophane. And so I go to this park, and I cut the trees down, take them home. I peel the bark off. If you wait too long, you can't get the bark off them. Let me go back there. Sorry. And in the case of this piece, I colored it by burning it. I burned it with a torch, and then I lacquered it. And but it's almost ritualistic, because it's sort of like the harvest piece. You have to go at the right time and do it at the right time, and if you don't, it doesn't work. The pieces are heavily carved. As you can see, they're kind of double tapered. They're a lot of fun to make, and it helps that in the timing, that the time where you can cut the tree and strip the bark off it is just before the black flies and the mosquitoes show up, so which helps. Probability. Again, this is the idea of building an image that references a scientific understanding of the world, and this is the double-slit experiment. The waves interfering with themselves as they go through the two slits, and becoming particles when they hit the screen. So, of course, the bottom elements here are the waves, and the top elements, the hangers, are represent particles. And I've done talks at the Perimeter Institute in Waterloo, and any physicist worth their salt will recognize this image and what it means. Again, Google double-slit experiment. A detail of the piece. Oh.
Can you hear me, John?
Yes.
It's Jan here.
Yeah.
Have you seen the latest, I guess, conjecture or theory, which is that the universe is conscious?
Yes. This is the ultimate effect that the double-slit experiment has had, is that consciousness, the act of observing of a conscious mind, actually collapses the probability wave and turns it into a particle. So, of course, for 60, 70 years, for a physicist to start talking about consciousness jeopardized their tenure. But more and more physicists are trying to develop equations that they can bring into their math that recognizes the idea of consciousness being a structural component of the universe.
Yeah,
Very
it's
strange stuff. Very strange stuff. Most physicists say that you can't use their math to draw a real picture of the real world, and they may be right. It may be inappropriate to do that, but the mythic potential of that idea is such that we are going to do that. There will be mythic ideas that are generated by a double-slit experiment. Yeah. Detail shot. Again, it's a galaxy built out of feathers, because the fact is, like I said in the video, the stomach may think we're standing still and the Earth is flat, but we're not. We're flying through space at thousands of kilometers an hour, and by using the iconic image of the feather to build the galaxy, I'm trying to allude to that.
Are the feathers blown or molded?
They're handmade. So they're made the same way you would blow glass, except there's no bubble. It's just solid glass. So you pick up solid glass on the pipe and you form it the same way you would blow a bowl.
That's intense.
Yeah, it's again, it's a huge amount of fun. It takes a long time. Glass blowing's funny. It takes a long time to learn how to do, and it took me a long time to learn how to make a feather. But once you've learned how to make it, then it becomes like intuitive. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And if you get the right assistant, it can just be like, it can be a lot of fun. It's a dance. I always play music loud in the studio when I'm blowing glass. And this
John, just before you move on, somebody's asking how you put the glass feathers together to create that effect, as they look like they're floating individually. How do you do this?
Each glass feather has 2 pins affixed to the back of it. And the pins are like hat pins. They're only like a 1/16 of an inch diameter. And I have a map. So I've got the piece mapped out. Each feather is numbered. And I put the map up in the wall and drill these tiny little pinprick holes in the drywall, and then the feather just slides on and the 2 points slide into those holes. And you have to work to get the feather back out, but that's how they're done. So they float against the wall. They float off the wall, and as you can see, there's the reflection on the wall, the color, and the shadow are a big part of the piece.
I have to say, as an art dealer, as your dealer, John, this is just a crazy idea to sell a client on. We're going to come and make about 80 holes in your wall. And so we actually got a commission to do 4 of these for a captain's dining room on a cruise ship for John, but we had to make a background panel that we permanently mounted them all on and ship it assembled because they just couldn't get their heads around this at all.
What's funny about that is that these holes are so small that, you know, you could just basically paint over them and they would disappear. That my other pieces, those panels made much larger holes in anybody's wall than any of these feathers would have made. But that's okay. I can put them on panels too. You know, actually, I'm working on a feather piece right now that goes on a panel. Infinity. This is the next slide coming up. You saw this piece work in the video. The top piece is a sail, but also a black hole. And the bottom, the middle section, of course, is section, and it's the iconic kind of 2D, 3D diagram of a black hole. And on the floor is a bed of sand. And what happens in the mathematics of physics, quantum mechanics, is that we can work our way back to the horizon of a black hole, or we can work our way back to the mathematically to the second or millionth of a second after the expansion or the Big Bang. But as soon as you get into a black hole, or as soon as you get in back to the Big Bang, all your math comes out infinities. It's nonsense. Everything's infinite energy, infinite space, infinite time. And as you can see with the piece in the video, it down at the point, the black hole is creating equations that are nonsense, that can't be read. And I love that piece. You could watch it all day.
It's brilliant.
It was so slow and methodical and moving, but again, the equations are unreadable. The color here is blue. The references to water. We all understand a water wave. We've all seen that image as we stepped into the pond, you know. My photographer always likes to sneak up on me, and but it gives you an idea of the scale of the pieces. So these are
absolutely stunning.
Yeah, these are, as you saw in the video of the glass blowing, these are solid glass pieces that are pulled, double tapered. It took a long time to figure out how to make these things, but again, like I said, I have a good group of people to help me in the studio. If you want to make anything of any scale in the studio, you need good assistants. And luckily, I have a corral of people who I can work with and who are very good glass blowers in their own right. The hangers are made out of metal wire. Gravitation. This was a piece that Carland put together for me with the Granite Club in Toronto. And they had this new edition, and the title of the new edition was Shifting Gravity. And I just looked at, when I heard that, I said, yeah, that's me. And so this is a piece that ultimately ended up in a stairwell at the Granite Club. This is the studio space I built it in, which was a very nice space to work in, as Jan mentioned to me once. But these are all little, there's 25 separate glass elements, and they're hung on 1/8" stainless steel rods and assembled into this sort of very dynamic shape that floated. I love the reflection of the piece in the wind.
If you're ever driving down Bayview Avenue, just look to your right and you can see it through the window of the Granite Club in Toronto.
Great piece to make. That's the view through the window from the outside. How am I at time there, Carlin?
I think we're there.
Okay.
I'm going to suggest look at that. That's a beautiful shot, John. I'm going to suggest that everyone turn their cameras back on, and then we can see one another, and we'll get you to stop sharing your screen, John.
Oh, where is that?
I'll do that.
Okay, if you could do that for me, that would be great.
Yep.
Okay.
And so, who has questions or comments about this work? Please, I'm sure John would like some feedback from some of you about what you think about what he showed you. I think you're the Stephen Hawking of the art world, John. And that was very deep over my head in terms of the science, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to understand that. Like, that's for me. That determines how I make the piece, the scale of the piece, the color of the piece, you know, the elements that I construct into the piece. But the viewer, I won't get into perception and cognitive science right now, but every viewer brings their own mythic idea to the piece. So every viewer will see their own thing in the piece, and that's perfectly valid. You know, I'm not trying to. I won't print a big explanation of the piece on the wall for people to read before they view the piece. You bring your own thing to the piece, and that's what the conversation is.
John, how big is that black hole piece?
I think altogether it's about 16, 18 feet high.
Wow.
So it was part of a show I had at the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery in Waterloo, which is right beside the Perimeter Institute, which is International Center for Particle Physics. So I got to give a talk there too, and that was like a thrill of my life.
I'll bet.
Yeah. Although the physicists didn't seem to be quite interested. They didn't want to hear about mythic potential of science.
If someone has a question here, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, John. It's Anita. I really loved your work.
Thank you.
I was wondering, you transport your stuff for exhibits all over. Do you make extra parts in case something breaks along the way? Or like, because it's glass, so how do you deal with that?
First, I'm going to knock on wood. Okay. That really hasn't been an issue. Most of my pieces are assembled, so I can disassemble them and pack them separately. So it really has not been an issue. I know some people who do send spare parts. And if something breaks, like if a feather breaks, it's not a big deal. I can make another feather, but I don't ship. Like that feather piece, the white feather piece, is about 6 feet in diameter. But I pack it individual feathers. and I give them a map. So I've never had a problem. Again, knock on wood. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Well,
How
if-
fit-
no,
How did I do?
Question.
Did I make sense?
Oh, absolutely. John,
Okay.
how physical is this work?
Well, the physicality is in the hot shop. And there it's very physical. You know, a day in the hot shop is like performing Swan Lake a dozen times in a row. You know, it can be very physical. It's very dynamic. It's always hot. In the cold shop, which isn't cold, but is where the assembly of the piece goes and the grinding and the polishing of the piece, that's meditative. You know, you get into a space where you know your hand, excuse me, your hands are full of the piece and your head is full of the piece, and when it's all working right, it becomes kind of a meditation where the rest of the world disappears. And that's where, you know, these ideas of science and myth and meaning and belonging, that's where they all kind of mix up and come together. And it doesn't happen every time. Sometimes it doesn't happen for a long time. But when it does happen, it's a special moment. But you only recognize it as special afterwards.
Yeah, it sounds like almost like athletics. You know, I can remember when I was in a high school and university playing basketball, and all of a sudden everything would click, and it was like you were in another world, and you could see everything, and everything had a path and a pattern. You just get this strange groove, and things start happening in this world you're in.
Yeah, yeah. You can, as the tennis ball comes over the net, you can read Schlesinger.
Yeah.
Schlesinger.
Yeah.
Schlesinger. Yeah, the whole thing just slows down. And,
Yes.
you know, that's something that monks have been chasing for a long time, and usually means years of practice and possibly living in a cave for a while. You know, again, consciousness and meditation and your mythic ideas of the world.
Yeah.
You know, I have to say that this whole process of being in isolation for the last couple of months may have been our collective version of that cave, where time really started to bend for me. I mean, I didn't know what day it was. You know, things really changed in terms of my perception of time. I'm seeing a few nods here. And in a way that I've never experienced before, certainly for as long. And it's been quite something. I just want to say, John, thank you very, very much for what is really a mind-bending presentation. So from all of our little thoughts, thank you so very, very much. It was really great. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for showing up, and Carlin, thank you for all your energy and your dedication. You are a dynamo, and I love you.
I love you too, John.